Today's episode explores the accommodations needed for concussion recovery, specifically understanding 504 plans and IEPs for sensory needs. A concussion can temporarily impact brain function, including thinking, concentration, memory, coordination, balance and movement, sensory sensitivities, and emotion. Recovery times vary from days to weeks to months and longer, particularly if there are sensory symptoms. Proper management is critical to prevent long-term issues. The process to receiving accommodations takes weeks to months, whether seeking a 504 or an IEP, which is an individualized education program. So, starting the process early in the concussion recovery is important to ensure your child or teen from kindergarten to 12th grade gets the support they need as quickly as possible. We will discuss the common sensory symptoms and possible accommodations, the difference between 504 and IEPs, and the role at the federal and state level, the process to apply for accommodation, the documentation needed, how to advocate for your child or teen, monitoring progress, and long-term consideration. As a reminder, the goal of Moms Heal Heads is to share advice and tools that I and others have learned that would have made the recovery road easier and shorter if only I knew about it earlier in my family's concussion recovery journey. So let's get started. I think it's important to do a level set of what is a concussion. It's a traumatic brain injury caused by a bump, blow, or jolt. It has direct impact to the head or the skull. It could be acceleration or deceleration, so it's front to back to front, or it could be a blast brain injury, which is from an explosion. And concussion symptoms really fall into four categories. There's the physical category, so that's the headache, dizziness, nausea, fatigue, sensory sensitivities, and amnesia, and even a feeling of pressure in the head. Then there's cognitive, which is difficulty learning new information. You can't keep up with the conversation. You feel like you're in a fog and can't really think clearly. You had word finding and processing issues and slow reaction time. Then there are emotional. You're easily irritated. You're more impulsive, sad, anxious, and there's a change in personality. And the fourth is sleep. Not feeling rested after sleep, sleeping more, not sleeping soundly, sleep cycles being disturbed, and trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. A concussion temporarily impacts brain function, including thinking, concentration, memory, coordination, balance and movement, sensations and sensitivities, as well as emotion. Recovery time varies from days to weeks to months and even longer, particularly sensory symptoms. Proper management is critical to prevent long-term issues. So with that grounding, let's talk about the common sensory symptoms. First, there's visual. So it's light sensitivity, blurred vision, double vision, eye strain, and difficulty focusing and concentrating. There's light sensitivity, which is known as photophobia. That's where bright lights can cause headaches or difficulty concentrating. There's noise sensitivity, which is hyperacusis. That's difficulty filtering out sound, sensitivity to all sounds, or to loud, unexpected noises like fire alarms. And all of these can trigger headaches and anxiety. And then you've got touch sensitivity, known as tactile defensiveness. And this is overstimulation from touch, crowds, or movement. And this has a huge impact from hugs to sitting on the bus to getting bumped in the hallway. And then there's lastly motion sensitivity, also known as vestibular dysfunction, where you have balance and movement issues that can cause dizziness or nausea and spatial disorientation. Now, this really impacts learning. If you think about all those symptoms or any of those symptoms giving you difficulty focusing and concentrating, slower processing speed, memory challenges, increased fatigue during cognitive tasks, lack of motivation, emotional regulation and mood, and sensory overload in typical classroom environments. Now, the good news is there are federal legal protections for students for both the 504 and the IEP. Both plans are rooted in federal law, and then on top of that, there are implementation and specific requirements that can vary by state though the core principles remain consistent, so that you'll need to get clarification on eligibility criteria, services and accommodation, funding, transition planning, views evaluation, because all those may differ from state to state. But here's a high-level summary. The 504 plan is a legal document that ensures students with disabilities receive the necessary accommodations. It does not change the curriculum, but provides support to ensure equal access to education. Schools must comply with Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, broader eligibility requirements, common accommodations for concussions. It requires medical documentation about extra time on assignments and tests, frequent breaks during the school day, modified PE or physical education requirements to accommodate dizziness and fatigue, and classroom accommodation for sensory sensitivities, such as light noise, where you're sitting, etc. IEPs, on the other hand, known as individual education programs, provide special education services along with these accommodations. It is more comprehensive than the 504 plan. It requires evidence as educational impact, includes specific learning goals and specialized instruction, and it's often with a more modified curriculum due to the student's need for significant support. Both provide legal binding accommodations, and the schools must comply with the documented plans. Now, let's go through specifically each one of those sensory issues and the possible accommodations that are available. First of all, visual and light sensitivity. You've got the fluorescent lights in classrooms and hallways and the gym that can trigger symptoms. You have difficulty using screens, whether that's computers or tablets, even the projectors. You have strategic seating in the classroom, either up front or away from windows. You have reduced visual stimulation, such as simplified worksheets and less bright colored paper. White paper and bright colors are really tough for somebody struggling with a concussion. Being able to talk versus writing the answers. And concussion symptoms include blurred vision, double vision, eye strain, increased headaches, fatigue, and difficulty focusing and concentrating on anything. Now, the accommodations here for visual and light sensitivity are allowing students to wear sunglasses, baseball hats, and in some schools, they allow the sweatshirt hoods to come over their head indoors. Adjust classroom lighting, and it would be ideal if you could dim the lights or use natural light if possible. That doesn't happen often. It's either the lights are on or off, and if it's an inside room, if they're off, it's dark, so that doesn't work for all the other kids in the class. To provide screen breaks or allow the use of blue light filters, assign strategic classroom seating, especially away from the windows, but also in front of the class, is less distracting. Reducing visual stimulation, simplified worksheets, printing on less bright paper, or being able to talk or write the answers. Now, let's talk about noise sensitivity. If you think about the school environment, you've got loud hallways, cafeteria noise that can be extremely overwhelming. You've got difficulty focusing and filtering sounds in these noisy classrooms and environments. You have louder, unexpected noises like the fire alarm that can trigger panic attacks and severe anxiety. You have concussion symptoms that include sensory overload that leads to headaches, fatigue, anxiety, and inability to concentrate. Accommodations for noise sensitivity includes permission to wear noise-canceling headphones or earplugs, or both, quiet places for studying and test taking, advance notice of fire drills or loud events, recorded lectures and notes for later review, written instructions to supplement verbal ones. Now let's talk about touch emotion sensitivity. Crowded buses, hallways, unexpected physical contact can cause a lot of distress. Anxiety about being bumped or jostled in the hallway or on the bus, increased stress levels during transition in the hallway, and the concussion symptoms include headaches, nausea, dizziness, spatial disorientation, and feeling like you were beat up having just walked to class. Accommodations here for the touch emotion sensitivity are permitting students to leave class early to avoid crowded halls, or extra time for transitioning between activities. Alternatively, trying to handle all activities that require left brain use and then doing right brain use or vice versa, but switching throughout the day to require pulling from left brain and the next class go to right brain and then back to left brain is very difficult. Providing designated seating away from high traffic areas such as alternative lunch locations to a quieter environment, or even just sitting in a quiet environment for study, or if you finished your classwork, go to that quiet environment. These designated safe spaces are fantastic for sensory breaks, possible naps, especially given the sleep disturbances that are so common. And modified physical education requirements are needed to reduce that physical contact, as well as increasing that heart rate can lead to more fatigue as well as further headaches. Academic accommodations in these instances are as follows. There's extended time for assignments and tests. You can get a private room for test taking, and that private room might have a couple kids, but it beats having 20 kids in the classroom as you're trying to take the test and are so distracted. Reducing workload when necessary to only the problems that you need, not the extra problems to really reinforce the concept and the quality of the assignments. Breaking up tasks into smaller tasks. Breaks during longer tasks. Note-taking assistance. Prioritizing essential curriculum. And a need for gradual return to the learning plan. Technology accommodations are screen readers and text-to-speech software, speech-to-text for writing assignments, digital organization tools, alternatives to computer-based work when symptoms flare up, and recorded lectures to review. After reviewing the sensory symptoms, you have a good idea of what your child needs. So how do you apply for these accommodations? First of all, you need to obtain medical documentation from a doctor. You have to request an evaluation from school. You need to request a meeting with school administration, which includes teachers, guidance counselor, possible dean, and social worker. You need to discuss specific symptoms and needs and what accommodations can be put in place. You need to develop and formalize the plan in writing, ensure all the teachers receive the plan and fully understand it, and schedule regular review meetings. Now, part of the documentation requirements includes the medical diagnosis of the concussion, detailed description of the symptoms, specific recommendations from healthcare providers, the impact on educational performance. Often, this is the point of view of some of the teachers your child has. Updated documentation as to recovery processes. Now, going through this whole experience, getting the processes in place is one thing, but advocating for your child throughout the process as well as after the process and follow-up is really important. So maintaining ongoing communication with the school, especially teachers, to ensure the accommodations are followed. In instances, I have had my kids, although they are still on accommodations, be viewed by a teacher as being fine and treated exactly the same way and not allowed to have some of their accommodations. And that was just due to the teacher's misunderstanding that because my child can speak to a teacher at great lengths for 5 or 10 minutes between classes on a topic they're very passionate about that they learned prior to the concussion, that they are cured. That is not the case. So staying in constant touch with teachers and your student allows you to see where there are some of those misunderstandings and gaps to get everybody back on track. You also need to work with your doctors to provide ongoing medical documentation as needed, as well as keep them up to date as to the status and what is going on, and that may adjust the treatment plan. Document all interactions and agreed upon accommodations. Know your legal rights under the 504 or the IEP. Consider bringing an advocate to meetings just so that if you've got to discuss somebody's taking notes, or you can actually hire an advocate that has been through this with many children, such that they know the areas to push on and what other accommodations could be available or what other supports the school really needs to provide. And ultimately, your goal is to focus on the student's functional needs, not just the diagnosis. And it's the functional needs that are so critical in the recovery process. I also found that general teacher education sometimes is necessary. And there's no way that you can fully drive this yourself. This is only informally driven based upon the meetings you schedule with different teachers. So if you share some of the concussion information that you're getting from doctors with the staff, that helps. You can explain what the symptoms are of the invisible nature of brain injuries, to be agnostic to a computer hard drive freezing up or a blue screen. So this computer should be working, but it's not, and it's just not doing anything. I found some of those analogies to be really important. My kids would use the example of like my brain just blue screened, or they'd say, my brain is operating as if I have a lot of tabs open, and as a result, I have no words. And if you gave me a choice, I can't even make a choice between two things. I need somebody else to decide. And then there's the emotional support based on behavioral considerations. So, mood swings, irritability, emotional outbursts, being more depressed, inability to collaborate on projects are all very possible and real. And the teacher needs to be kind of tuned in to what is going on to assess if collaboration is the right thing for your student, or if it would be better if they did it on an individual basis or somehow did a piece of that collaborative project on their own. And at times, it's really important to be assigned a social worker if they're available in your school, because there's a lot of struggle with what I could do versus what I can do. And there's frustration there. There's frustration with all the noise. So trying to interact with friends is limiting or not at all of interest. But then your child's out of the loop on so many things. They start to not get invited to things, which is tough. So staying abreast on that and having a social worker just monitor this a bit is super helpful. Providing specific strategies for classroom management from various sources. So if something is working in one class, it's worth trying it in another. But the other lens you need to add in is science and math classes are very similar. So taking the same approach in those classes are good, but English, foreign language, and art operate differently. So what works in math class isn't necessarily going to work in English, and vice versa. So some of this trial and error, or if something works, having all the teachers communicate what is working for your child to see if they can replicate it in another classroom is really important. So establishing some consistent communication on what's working, what's not, even communication on symptom flare-ups and specifically how to treat it. At one point in time, I had a kid that could be standing in class doing a science lab and then would get dizzy, so would need to sit down. But then if she was sitting down and got dizzy, she actually had to lay down. And this was something that was really important to coordinate across all the teachers because they couldn't figure out and the doctors couldn't figure out what was going on. And it literally took 9 months and losing an entire summer before they could actually figure out what was wrong with her after meeting with a cardiologist and doing a stress test. But until that point in time, we would have had no idea. So it was good to have that visibility. Although as a parent, you might want to drive this piece, it's possible that your school system has a set way of handling this level of communication. And as was the case in my situation, there were gaps in the process, and we worked together to develop a symptom tracker, and that aided in troubleshooting to assess the schedule. But not everybody would fill out the system tracker, and it wasn't something that was brought to all the accommodation meetings. So although it was the right thing to provide visibility and provide clarity, because it was something that was driven by myself and not driven by the school, it was informally used. So you really want to make sure the school is on board and have them drive as many of these gap fillers as possible. The other piece is monitoring and making adjustments. Those regular check-ins with your student and your teacher are critical. Adjustment to accommodations is important as recovery progresses. So if your child doesn't need some accommodations anymore, like wearing that hat or sunglasses, honestly, they prefer to not wear the hat or the sunglasses in class. So, remove that out of the documentation and celebrate the areas of improvement, help the group understand where there are setbacks, because this is really like climbing a sand dune. It's one step forward, two steps back, one step forward, we're doing well, another step forward, and then you slide back 3 steps. And it really is a process of forward, backward, forward, and then gaining some momentum. But with that, you have to address new challenges as they arise. So monitoring and then making adjustments to your plans is really important in that recovery process success. And then lastly, around long-term considerations, gradual return to full academic load, similar to gradually return to physical education, is critical. Pushing a child to get back into the swing of things in the classroom faster than they should is only going to set their symptoms off and set them back further in the recovery process. So you don't want to do that. You're going to have ongoing communication with your medical team. There's potential need for accommodations during high stress periods and one-off days, as well as many don't know that the accommodations that you receive, whether it's the 5 or the IEP, can also be used with college testing. So you submit all that documentation for the SAT or the ACT, and they will evaluate those accommodations and try to accommodate them in those testing environments, which is super helpful. You need to also use this IEP and 504 documentation in the college transition planning process, because the colleges are open to what kind of accommodations are needed. They may not be able to accommodate everything, but they can accommodate quite a bit. You'd be surprised the level of services available at the collegiate level. And reminding your child to be a self-advocate and really build those skills and continuously execute on those skills is critical in order to make sure that if symptoms are arising, that they are quickly pulled out to reset in order to avoid the onset of continuous symptoms. Now, there are lots of resources on what I've discussed here today. You've got the U.S. Department of Education, you've got your state for which you're in, and those local nuances are really important. You've got your school district and the special education department. And then there's associations like the Brain Injury Association of America that supports concussion recovery and has a lot of good resources. There are local neuropsychologists that specialize in concussions. There's local and online support groups for both parents and students. There may even be a support group in school or after school with guidance counselors. And there are a series of concussion management apps and tools depending on the symptoms that you are trying to relieve. I hope you're walking away in this conversation with the fact that concussion recovery really requires a comprehensive approach. Sensory accommodations are critical to your students' success. There are legal protections that exist to support students, whether it's the 504 or the IEP. Advocacy and documentation are critical. Collaborative team approach is essential because it really yields the best results in success for your student. And that concludes today's episode on accommodations needed for concussion recovery, understanding the 504 plan and IEPs for sensory needs. Thank you for being with me today. Remember, you've got this, and any progress is progress, no matter the size or the amount of it. I admire you for seeking solutions for those that you love. I believe in you and your ability to take in what you have learned today and apply it in some way to positively change you or your family's concussion recovery journey. Thank you for tuning in to today's episode. If you are dealing with concussion recovery, you are not alone. That's why this podcast brings you a powerful blend of expert guidance, cautionary tales, inspiring journeys, and practical resources to help support you and your family at every step in your concussion journey. If you find this information helpful, click Follow, subscribe, or drop a 5-star rating today, as it helps us keep the most relevant content coming, as we are dropping new episodes regularly and you don't want to miss out. And don't forget, if you want to take the conversation deeper on this topic or have questions about concussion recovery, join the Moms Heal Heads Facebook community, as healing happens faster together. I'll see you in the next episode. This podcast is presented solely for educational and entertainment purposes. I am just a mom who has navigated concussion recovery with 2 family members over 7 years. I am not a licensed therapist, and this podcast is not intended to be a substitute for the advice of a physician, professional coach, psychotherapist, or other qualified professional diagnosis or treatment. Users should not disregard, go against, or delay in obtaining medical advice for any medical or mental health condition they may have, and should seek the assistance of their healthcare professionals for any such conditions. Until the next episode, join the conversation on the Moms Heal Heads community on Facebook.